Here is the best elemental light bowgun build for Title Update 2.5 using a craftable charm. Here is an example of a charm that is going to provide a 1.9% DPS boost. Lastly, here we have the best in slot charm that is going to give a 4.2% DPS boost over the build earlier with a craftable charm. Now guys, before we get into the video, I would just like to thank my two theory crafting partners, Unkempt Herald and Scrub. Next, I want to thank Lord Vietna, who has helped me a lot with promoting this channel. And finally, I would like to thank you, the viewer, for supporting me along this journey. Hello everyone, it's Damo here, and I'm here with my mate Scrub.
Greetings.
So today we're going to be going through our updated elemental light bowgun builds for Title Update 2.5. These builds have had hours and hours and hours of time that has been spent theory crafting, playtesting, and gathering charms, and then also discussing between ourselves. When you add up the amount of time spent from myself, from Scrub, and from Herald, it ends up equaling over 300 hours. And so, because it has taken us so long to do these optimizations, we're going to be splitting this video into two parts. One part with light bowgun, which is going to be this video here, and then we'll have another video coming up soon for heavy bowgun. Now, when we look at Title Update 2.5, other than those new charms coming in, which are going to affect our builds directly, light bowgun elemental damage has also been increased by 3%. Alright, so before we get into the builds, Scrub, would you like to run us through the actual elemental playstyle?
Sure. So we are using two largely identical guns with slightly different decorations on them. One is spec'd for damage, and one has focus on it, since we'll be on it for most of the hunt, so that it regens our gauge more efficiently. So at the beginning of the hunt, we start on our damage-focused gun. We unload our rapid-fire gauge, then we hop on our sacred, switch guns, hop off, dump a rapid fire gauge down to 2 shots remaining, or however many shots you feel like, as long as the gauge is less than half. Then you put on Corrupted Mantle, which instantly regens half your gauge. You spend your gauge, and then when you're out of it, out of rapid fire mode, that is, you have a couple of options. Your goal is to regen your rapid fire gauge as efficiently as possible, and efficiently means fast and with good damage without sacrificing all of your damage. And so your options are, for the highest damage, you alternate regular elemental shots with elemental chasers. Elemental chasers are very committal, but they're our highest damage options. You can also use spread chasers, which are decent damage and offer more flexibility with dodging monster attacks, since they use just slightly over half as many frames as LE chasers, and can also be animation. The animation can be shortened with a sidestep. And finally, you can use normal and possibly pierce chasers to replenish your gauge from a safer distance, since they don't have as wide of a spread on the reticle as do spread. But LE chasers are what we typically recommend for damage purposes. And so for the rest of the hunt, up until the very end, you alternate between refilling your gauge with LE chasers or your choice of other ammo, depending on what the situation warrants, and spending your gauge down from full. At the very end, or perhaps when you're about to restock, you want to spend the gauge on the gun that you're on, and then switch back to the initial gun, and then spend down all of the gauge on that. Because in the background, the whole time you've been on gun 2, gun 1 has been regenning its gauge. And it's about 4 minutes of time for that gauge to regen to full in the background. And so you essentially get to cheat out 2 free extra gauges over the course of like a 5.5 minute block, just from having those 2 guns that are identical. And the reason why I'm going over this, even though I know some of you are readers of our written document and who have picked up on some of these details from the previous elemental video and how to play the weapon type, is that Because our guns are spec'd differently, one for focus and one for damage, our decorations on our charms and the charm setup themselves need to be set up in such a way that they are compatible with both guns. And so, for example, if we get rapid fire up on our talisman, then that prevents us from effectively using it on the damage focused gun. And so these adaptations that are necessary sort of shape how we arrived at the meta that we did for the talismans. And so I just wanted to reiterate the play style to emphasize why something might not be what you think it is if you went into the video with a preconceived notion of what the optimal charm is.
Okay, so now we're going to get onto the builds that we're presenting in the video. Now, taking a lot of inspiration from the previous video that we made, one of the builds there featured earplugs 3. And over time, we've learnt that earplugs is almost a core skill on these builds. Being able to shoot during monsters' roars has been incredible. However, on our old Gore 4 setups, if you ever wanted to run even just 2 points of earplugs, which, may I tell you, is used for 99% of monsters in this game, if you ever wanted to use those 2 points of earplugs, you had to actually drop down to Agitator 4, and it was not worth doing that because the 5th point of Agitator is actually its strongest level when you go pound for pound. So, what this has done is it's actually made us go from a Gore 4 setup to a 2-piece Lagiacrus, 2-piece Gore Magala setup. The build that you're going to see in front of you now has a craftable charm, but there's many ways that this build can be reworked to be done with RNG charms, which we're going to see later on in the video. One main feature of this build that differs it from the previous builds is the use of 2 points of ballistics on gun 2. We first saw this idea come up when we were having a look at gun 1 and the way that it is actually able to use 1 point of ballistics. We found that when we're fighting certain monsters such as Radar, during its roars it would tilt its head back and it would be out of critical distance. However, due to the critical element precise decoration that's used on gun 1, we found that we were able to maintain critical distance a lot more easily. And we figured, hey, why not drop 2 points of opener and then run 2 points of ballistics on gun 2? It will help us maintain critical distance a lot more easily. And in testing, it ended up being really good. But why is that the case? Well, it's pretty simple. Our raw damage is halved when we are out of critical distance. And raw damage makes up 36% of our total damage on these elemental builds. That means if you're out of critical distance, you're taking an 18% damage penalty. 2 points of ballistics allows you to minimize the times when that's going to be happening. Scrub, did you want to add anything onto that?
Sure. I wanted to elaborate a little bit on earplugs and why it's so powerful. One, in contrast to previous titles, it's just a 3 point skill, and we only need, like Damo said, 2 points of earplugs for most of the monsters in the game, with a few exceptions. Um, Another thing that the earplugs lets us do by ignoring roars is when we are refilling our gauge with elemental chasers. The frame commitment is like 2.5 seconds, just over. And if you get interrupted at any point, you lose out on a lot of your potential gauge regen. So it allows us to find opportunities for our hunter to plant their feet and fire 2 slow shots with the chaser that would otherwise be impossible with earplugs. And additionally, if you're going to go without earplugs, you have to roll through the roar or you have to burst step through the roar. And both of those are technical damage losses compared to just having earplugs. And since the margin for a perfect build without earplugs and a build with earplugs is like somewhere in the range of 1 to 2% DPS, we've deemed earplugs to be a damage gain for our sets just because the opportunities that they allow you to take advantage of, especially when a monster is roaring, they're not doing anything, so it's a free perfect pierce line for you. We've adjusted all our builds to include earplugs as a default. Even speedrunners are running this.
Alright, so when we look at optimizing these sets even more, that's going to come from using RNG talismans. The first optimization you can make to this is by simply adding 1 point of Tetrad Shot onto the build, which allows the build to have a 1.9% DPS increase. the way that you can very easily add one level of Tetrad shot onto this build is by getting a charm that's going to be Agitator or Burst that has that level of Tetrad shot on it as a weapon skill, and then it has a level 3 slot. So you essentially get the same value as the craftable Agitator 2 charm, but you just get that level of Tetrad shot. One thing that should be noted though is it doesn't have to be a level of Tetrad shot on the charm. You could also get one level of opening shot and then just rearrange the decos. So essentially, you have 4 different charms that you could get. You could go Tetrad Agi, Tetrad Burst, Opener Agi, Opener Burst. But just bear in mind that all of these charms need to have a level 3 slot. Now, of course, the sky's the limit when it comes to getting optimizations on your build with these new charms. And the God charm that we're going to be looking at for creating the best possible build is going to be one that has the weapon skill being rapid fire up, the armor skill being, once again, either burst or agitator is fine, doesn't matter which one, and then a level 1 weapon decoration slot with 2 level 1 armor slots. In that level 1 decoration slot, you're going to be putting in that Tetrad shot or that level of opener, just whichever one is not going to be slotted onto your weapon. And then in those free level 1 slots, you pretty much just pick up extra quality of life. Constitution can be nice because you get slightly higher maximum might up time. But if there's other quality of life skills you want to put in there, such as windproof, level 3 for certain monsters that, give off, dragon wind aura, then it's going to be nice there. Recovery up is another nice comfort skill that you could throw in there. But at the end of the day, the more important thing from this talisman is going to be that we're getting this free level of rapid fire up. Now, you are going to be down a level 3 slot on this build, but it's fine. Just take off that level of latent power. It doesn't do too much for the build anyway. And if you do a really fast hunt, it's not going to be active for too long. But this is the absolute ceiling that your builds can go to if you end up getting a God charm. Scrub, did you have anything to add to those God builds?
Yeah. My advice to the viewer is to not be deterred by the abysmal rates that you see online for these charms. What we are presenting to you are just what we have found to be a good budget and the optimal options for the charms. But as a general rule of thumb, looking at your own charms, as long as you can pick up a useful weapon skill while keeping your armor skills the same, like for example, instead of Tetrad Shot on your Rarity 5, you get Attack Boost. That's a 1% gain. You get a point of Ballistics. That's pretty useful. And on your Rarity 8 charms, you're probably going to lose an armor skill. But if you could pick up more points of Ballistics and that ever important point of Tetrad Shot, or its substitutions like Opener and whatnot, you're going to be better off, and you're going to very quickly find easy upgrades to your craftables. And I want to stress that they are easy. Like within like the first 2 hours, everyone in our group had a small but noticeable upgrade over our craftable charms. And I can't promise that's going to happen to you, but it's pretty likely that it's going to happen to you.
So it's pretty clear that if you want to do the optimal damage with your light bow guns, you need to have 2 Ardian guns. And I understand that a lot of people might be put off by that. Before we dive into some craftable options, I just want to point out that for Ardian bowguns, it's actually only a 1 in 10 chance to get the actual god roll of 2 capacity and 3 attack augments on your gun. Now, the reason why that's so much better than melee is because we only have 3 options to pick from every time the gun rolls. We have attack boost, affinity boost, or capacity boost, whereas melee have 4 options, and that drastically decreases the chances that you have of getting one of those god rolls. Nonetheless, there are a bunch of different guns you can use as craftable options, and these are all pretty solid if you don't want to use an Ardian. On screen now, I'm going to show the damage percentages that these have compared to their Ardian counterparts. I'm also going to be looking here at status Ardians because there are some very useful statuses in this game, but a lot of people are going to be curious as to how much DPS is given up when running these status guns. Now, the mods on all of these guns are going to be the ones that increase the clip size. Increasing the clip size is good because not only does it directly increase your DPS, but it also decreases how much you're going to be putting yourself in a situation where you do an animation that has a long commitment to it. During those long animation commitments, you're likely to get hit. And that is one of the big downsides to using these craftable guns or even status audience. They feature lower clip sizes, and those extra reloads that you have to do are times where you're likely to get hit. Also, you might be likely to get hit when you're doing chases. The more chaser shots you have to do is going to stem from how much longer these guns take to fill up their rapid fire gauges. These guns are going to take longer to fill up their rapid fire gauges because none of them fit focus except for the status audience. You might be looking at this and thinking, well, even with all of that being said, the Lagiacrus light bowgun has more DPS than the elemental Ardian bowguns. So why don't we recommend Lagiacrus light bowguns? And that's going to be for a few reasons, guys. Obviously, the aforementioned lack of focus on the build means that you're going to have to spend more time charging that gauge and you're more likely to get hit. The DPS increase here is one that's seen only on a spreadsheet or one that's seen when you're versing a training dummy and not related to the practical DPS that you're going to see when you're hunting. Do you have any other thoughts you wanted to add to that, Scrub?
Yes. When you're doing chasers, you're more committal. You plant your feet for 155 frames, 2.5 seconds, just over. And the more often you do that, the riskier it is. And you see the laggy gun in some speed runs because the risk doesn't matter because you just reset until the monster doesn't punish you for the risk that you took. And then the higher damage is king. So all that matters in speed runs is the training dummy DPS. Furthermore, speedruns are going to be using heroics oftentimes, and one advantage that heroics has in relation to the laggy gun is that if you're proccing heroics, you are also immediately proccing latent power, making it an actually good skill instead of a cope good skill. And if you're running latent power as an actually good skill, then there is a set optimization that you can do with three-piece Radow, which also has more Thunder Res, which feeds into the convert Thunder Res and makes the laggy bowgun pull even more ahead. That's why you see in speedruns, but also why we're not recommending it. Because it takes longer to refill your gauge, you're more committal, and also its damage doesn't even pull ahead as much as you would think it would based on the value from convert thunder res because the light bowgun actually encounters an ellie cap on its damage. It's marginal, but it does prevent it from eking out the full potential of convert thunder res. Uh, Interestingly, the more raw you have, the higher your ellie cap is, but your element doesn't increase by the full amount due to something that's a little beyond the scope of the video with how elemental ammo scales based on the raw. But this is relevant because if you're not using things like the guild hub meal for 5 raw, mega demon drug for 7 raw, might seed and demon powder for 10 raw each, your ellie cap is lowered more than your Ellie is lowered by not having the raw. And so if your hunts are taking longer than 3 minutes or 4.5 minutes of the pre-buff set, your might seed and your demon powder are falling off. And then your damage past that point gets penalized far more than what the Ardian would be penalized by not having a might seed or a demon powder active. And if you're the kind of player who likes to save resources and you aren't using any of those buffs, then the laggy bowgun is just not going to feel good and be competitive in the same way that you might see in a speedrun.
Yeah, look, another reason as to why it's not going to be as good outside of the speedruns is because one thing that isn't factored into these calculations here is that it actually has one less level of ballistics. So the build that we featured earlier in the video has 2 points of ballistics, but due to the limited weapon decoration slots on these guns, only 1 point of ballistics is actually allowed without taking a major DPS loss. So that was something that I just wanted to add in there, and that's why, guys, even though the Lagiacrus light bowgun, you're going to see it in YouTube videos, you're going to see people using it, it's actually not as good as Perfect Ardians. Okay, so the last thing that I wanted to touch on was just a set that uses two-piece Gormagala and two-piece Mizu. Now, we're not showing that in the video. Scrub, why do you think we might not be showing that in the video?
So the theoretical advantage of such a set is that the set afflicts you with Bubble Blight. And then 30 seconds later, when the Bubble Blight expires, you proc Coalescence. And Coalescence is arguably our most powerful armor skill. And the uptime of it is kind of low from Gore. So increasing the uptime of a strong skill seems good. But you're giving up a lot to uh, get this uptime, in addition to just losing the 14 average raw from the 4-piece gore set bonus. Some of these other things that you may not consider just at a glance is that you have to get the optimal coalescence uptime that the set really has the potential for, you have to micromanage your buffs. You want your fourth roll or your third roll or your fourth sidestep, I think, which includes burst steps, to be timed right as your coalescence activates. So then 30 seconds from then, when coalescence drops, it immediately comes back up again. So that in itself is tedious. But it's also kind of a damage loss, not necessarily from the coalescence, but because of the fact that you would either have to do burst steps or rolls when you wouldn't otherwise. Uh, and rolling prevents you from shooting, obviously, and burst stepping is actually lower DPS than just holding trigger and shooting while in rapid fire mode. Just on a frame perspective, never mind the loss of maximite uptime. There may be potential for it in the future, but we are currently not evaluating it as a damage increase right now.
Yeah, I just wanted to also throw out there because some people are going to think, oh, it also gets Slicker Blade, so that could make up again for the maximum might. But the uptime's not going to be great. And then at times, you're also going to see that if you do have Slicker Blade active and maximum might active, then you're going to start overcapping affinity. So you're just not getting the full benefit that you're expecting to get from a set like this.
All that is on top of the fact that to get Slicked Blade, you have to use the Mizu Bowgun, which is already the weakest of the bunch because its base stats are just low. And so while you get up to, I think, 30% affinity, I'm not super familiar with the skill, but I think that's what you get. You're compensating for an already low stat package for a conditional buff that is dubious in value and hard to objectively quantify.
Yeah, and look, the gun has 15% affinity on it, and then 30% from Slicker Blade is going to get you to, what's that, 45%. Then Agitator 5 is going to put you up to 60%. And then you've got the Gore antivirus combo, 85%. So then, when those times that Max Might is actually active on the build, it's just overcapping your affinity, as I said earlier. So it's really just not that big of a damage boost, and you're better off sticking to an Ardian gun for water. Alright guys, well that finishes us off for today. Tune in next time for an elemental heavy bowgun video.